All right, so welcome everyone. Today is the second episode of Take Note, and the title of our podcast or video podcast has changed a little bit. Now it's going to be conversations with business leaders and change makers, and I think that's a little bit more appropriate, especially for who we're talking to today. Today, our guest is Verlin Gradney. Verlin is a powerhouse, and I mean that in no small way. When it comes to startups and finance, Verlin is he knows his stuff, and I know you guys will get a lot of really valuable nuggets today talking to him. Verlin is a wealth manager by trade, but a visionary at his essence. Verlin began his securities career with GE Capital and then owned and operated his own wealth management firm and registered investment advisory in San Diego, California. After 13 years in the securities and wealth management field, Verlin started his own private finance firm which specialized in venture capital, corporate debt, and structured finance. And either those are big words that I think we're going to talk a little bit more about today as well, and hopefully he'll expand on. Currently, Verlin owns and operates an international finance consulting firm called Trade Desk Advisors, which specializes in the design and implementation of specialized and customized corporate institutional offering packages. But wait, there's more. Related to how we first met, in 2019, Trade Desk Advisors, through the work of Verlin, launched Mindset Startup Academy to help bridge the gap between founders and early stage investment community. We'll be diving into that, I'm sure, quite a bit today. Verlin has a unique skill set which marries deep financial expertise with an innovative approach to community building. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Verlin Gradney. Verlin.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Pankaj. Happy to be here. It's nice to be on the other side now. So now I get to see how everyone else feels.
Exactly. And yeah, so for everyone listening out there, Verlin actually interviewed me about a year and a half ago, maybe now. It's time.
Yeah.
Time flies, and actually there's a copy of that somewhere on the Mindset Academy page, and also I'm sure on the internet, other places too. And that was actually one of the first interviews I did that Verlin interviewed me on I believe it was cap tables
and corporate governance. Yeah.
Yes. So today I wanted to partially return the favor, but also Verlin and I have had such great organic conversations over the years, talking about a variety of things. And Verlin, speaks so well and so eloquently on finance and corporate matters that I thought he had to be on here because of also what he's doing in terms of starting a new startup. I guess it's a academy. Yeah, I think that's the best term for it, is a learning environment and also community for startups. And yeah, why don't we actually start a little bit there? I think we're going to bounce around a little bit. So excuse me, but I want to kind of really first have you talk a little bit about what Mindset Academy is and what caused you to start it and kind of what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's still evolving. To your point, academy, I think is a good terminology, although there's a lot under there. So I'll try to give you sort of the Reader's Digest version on this. But coming from the background that you referenced in finance, a lot of my time was spent institutional. And what those folks in the institutional space know, and if you're not familiar with it, there's a common language and a common dance that works, right? And on the supply and demand side, or each side of a negotiation or transaction, there's usually a certain ilk, understanding, and background. And if you think about what that does in a transaction, although it can create some conflict, it does create, in the ideal scenario, the ability for things to transact and execute quickly, right? It's rather efficient. It's also pretty straightforward. It's not very politically correct. It's straight down the middle. And when I decided a few years ago, if we can help companies Series B and beyond, why couldn't we actually do something for the conceptual through Series A? So about 3 years ago, I'm very kind of methodical and problematic in the way that I do things. I'm never in a hurry. So what I did first is I met with a few hundred founders. I met with a few hundred early stage investors and funds. And I used a little bit of my clout and reputation to do that. And it became very evident to me and clear the disconnect that exists in the startup space in stark contrast to what occurs in the institutional space. And what I basically came up with as my thesis is that although I love pitch days and demo days and they provide a lot of experience, a lot of the early stage investment funds that you see in MindStart Academy we interview are agreeing to a certain extent that it has created a little bit of a too far romantic view of how this all works. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity out there for founders of all types to understand and learn what happens after the pitch. And so that really gave me an idea to say, let's create a free platform, the Mindset Startup Academy, and let's open it up to everyone. But let's do something different. There's a ton of people out there that can tell you what a 60-second pitch is and what a 2-minute pitch is. And to be honest, there's a lot of us in the investment community in the early stage space that are wondering really how effective that is. You know, how am I really supposed to understand or provide any reasonable or valuable feedback when I'm asking you to take this big, wide scope and project and jam it into 2 minutes? So what I knew then that we wanted to create a platform that teaches the inside baseball, that dance with you and an investor when you and the team get excited because your pitch deck just got accepted. But even beyond that, Pankaj, I really wanted to get founders an opportunity to understand who we are beyond just a check. Because what you hear a lot of the investors talk about is founders should feel more comfortable that you can interview them as much as they're interviewing you. Because should you be one of the lucky ones to collect a big check, you're basically married for the next 7 to 10 years. You really want to make sure that you guys jive, at least on a number of criteria to help facilitate that relationship. And the third thing is, I really wanted to tackle the problematic issue that over 90% of these founders that go out to raise capital actually fail. And I truly believe that by understanding the dance, you know, we, from an investor due diligence standpoint, we all read from the same hymn book, I like to say. We follow the same factors. The hard part is they're subjective. So if we want to move the needle for founders and help create more meaningful engagements and facilitate more capital, we have to find that common language that exists a lot in the institutional space that's really just sort of butting heads and talking past each other in the startup space. And the way I started it is I picked up my old days of smiling and dialing with a phone book and a phone, and I just started calling people. And I stumbled upon the chairman of the Angel Capital Association, sent him a message, told him I was a big geek for the book that he wrote that talked about investor due diligence. We asked his permission to reverse engineer that book and point it at the demand side. And yeah, we just had our 1-year anniversary. So we started off with some courses, and what we found very clearly was that founders have a very finite amount of time in their busy lives. And what we needed to do was to synthesize that information. But I also found very early, Pankaj, is that I think there's too much in the startup space. I'm not shy on opinions in the startup space, where you get a lot of sort of, you know, this is gospel according to growth. This is the way you got to do it. This is the way you got to do a pitch deck. And if you're a founder, it's like a tennis match. You're just going. And then before you know it, it's like paralysis by analysis. So in February, we said, you know what, let's put the classes aside. We want to teach investor due diligence. Here's a novel idea. Why don't we reach out to the investor community? Pick one early stage fund per week. And why don't we ask the actual investment community to teach these things? And to be honest, I was pretty apprehensive about how that would go down. But the response was overwhelming. You've got roughly 5,000 early stage investors in the United States, professional investors. And this year we'll interview approximately 1% of that entire audience. Next year we're going to aim for 2%. And the purpose of these, as I stated, is so that founders can get an idea of who are these 5,000. The average founder can probably name you 5 funds. And here's the funny thing is, they can name you the big funds, the funds that are probably not even in your atmosphere. And there's about 330 to 350 funds in the United States that are 100 investments or more. The other 4,500 are 0 to 100.
Yeah.
And those are the ones we're interviewing because those are the ones founders should know about. So they join our membership for free. They watch an interview. And here's the deal I give them. If you watch that interview and you find that you might have a fit after hearing that fund manager talk, then at the end of the interviews, the fund manager say, hey, if you think there's a fit, and we actually give them the contact information. So we're trying to educate. At the same time, we're trying to solve that day-old question of every founder around the world asks, can you introduce me to investors? Can you introduce me to investors? And so here's a methodology to being able to do that. That's phase 1. And then we'll start releasing phase 2 and phase 3 in 2021 and 2022.
Fantastic. Wow. It's a lot of information I want to dive into there. There's I was taking some notes.
I got to work on getting that down a little more.
No, I mean, you know so much. When you know so much, it's hard to, stop because it's a complicated area, right? There's so many things to talk about in startup world. And so a few questions actually I have, but maybe one is going back a little bit, you're talking about, your background in investment advisory and wealth management and looking originally at these, Series B and beyond private and maybe public companies that you're investing in. And, there's certain requirements and due diligence and information that they're required to provide to you at that higher level. How do you deal with maybe some of that information asymmetry with a startup? Is there a way that you've kind of figured out to maybe fast track some of the due diligence on the lower levels? Because I know as a startup attorney and corporate attorney, that's one of the challenges that we run into a lot is some of these smaller startups don't have the information that will make investors comfortable. And is that even necessary?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there are a lot of people that said this couldn't be done. I'm not saying this in a bragging type way, but I don't know a lot of other outfits that are doing what we're doing. And that is, we're teaching them saying, these are the typical 80 to 100 markers that we all make our decisions off of. And if I were to break them down, it's basically quantitative and qualitative. And the ironic thing about this, as you know, is that a majority of our decisions are qualitative leaning, not quantitative. But there is an idea that for a long time, people said, well, you can't teach founders how to do that stuff. It's going to go right over their heads. Well, you tell a company or a firm like us you can't do it, and now you just created a challenge, and now we're going to try to go prove it. Right. And that's why when we're doing these classes, the way we've gone about doing this is we break down the process of investor due diligence in about 9 or 10 key factors. This is what the investors come on board to teach. And then what we've gotten really good at over the last few years is when we're focused on one of those 9 to 10 pillars, what we do then is we lay out for the founders to say, these are all the qualitative and quantitative data points that need to be determined here. And the key thing about this is making sure that you can describe things bottoms up, not top down. It's the detail. That's what creates awareness. That's what gets you a higher qualitative score. But then the other thing that we do, Pankaj, is we take those and then we break them into stages. So if someone's pre-revenue or let's say very early in traction, you might have 50 data points or KPIs in that area you should describe. But until you start churning 50,000 MRR, you just need to focus on these 15. Because that investor audience you're going to talk to, they know all of this isn't happening. So the first thing that we learned very early on is don't teach the entire spread. Teach what's pertinent to their specific model. And then the same thing would go for those that have decent traction, and the same would go for those that have an abundance of traction. So we figured out a good methodology. And when you see the founders and they see all the data points, they're going, ugh. And then the moment when they see these and they go, okay, yeah, I could do that. And it's about following that process all the way down those 9 to 10 pillars and then teaching them over time that bottoms up approach. I truly believe, regardless of the founder's background, you are capable of teaching founders because we're doing it every day. But we have to be able to take our patience with that particular process. It's incredibly key. And I'm a firm believer that, and we can maybe talk about a little later today, we're getting ready to release phase 2, which I'm really excited about. You know, I've probably met with 100 funds. I think we've interviewed now close to 40 funds. So pretty soon we'll be one of the larger libraries. And the best thing about it, Pankaj, is listening to these fund managers. I'm a big believer that the pitch deck is almost pretty much dead. I mean, they all look the same at this particular point.
Tell me more, because I felt this for a while, and I mean, tell me a little bit more about why it's dead, because, and also what we're seeing might replace it.
The largest fund, one of the larger funds in terms of deal flow, 18,000 or more, we were talking to yesterday in their pre-interview. He's probably the 15th fund to confirm this with me. Here was the problem with pitch decks was, every one of these things looks the same now, basically as a derivative of Uber or Airbnb. And it's very similar to your 60-second pitches, right? It's, here's the problem, here's who I am, here's how I solve it, Here's my team. Here's when I gain traction. Call me. There is literally nothing in most of these pitch decks that allow for any understanding or determination of whether or not I want to engage this particular process. And to be quite frank, the same thing happened for business plans. I mean, business plans and SWOT analysis, what am I really doing with that? Yeah. And so when this gauntlet that you go through of capital raise is so selective, as a founder, you have to determine what type of data do you really want put in front of them to change this? Mm-hmm. And that's what actually we're doing. So your question earlier about what replaces it, we're building a new format, investor due diligence model, where we teach the companies those 9 to 10 aspects, only what's pertinent to them. And then we basically churn that into an infographic for them. And what we're testing with the funds now is saying, hey, what would you rather have, the pitch deck and the business plan? Or what if I just put in front of you the key matrix that you can use to see where they're at? And then you can have your own qualitative test to see the way they explained it to determine their true level of awareness for the information. Yeah. 9 out of 10 investors are going to say, I'll take the lab.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I mean, especially just due to the sheer number of pitches they're going to see, that investors don't have time for that. And also, I feel a lot of pitch decks I see, and when clients show them to me, the assumptions and the assumptions that they make are just, really based on nothing, right? It's based on what you feel it could be. Oftentimes they lack data, real data. And it's based on what is oftentimes disingenuous, assumptions about a market, which you feel will just want to make you better, look better. And I feel investors see through that. Seasoned investors will definitely see through that. I was going to ask you about another, another type of business model that I've used in the past, and actually I've seen, a few years ago, I ended up taking a product development class with General Assembly, and we learned how to use a business model canvas. Have you seen that used at all, or is it helpful at all when showing it to investors, or is that too pared down?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because, again, there's thousands of them. In my personal experience, to your point about the pitch decks, we just released an interview today, because we do one every Friday, with Ryan Mendoza at Scrum Ventures. Very brilliant guy, interesting fund. And this is something interesting about these interviews, as they tell you. And he literally said, if I see that pitch deck and I see $100 billion market, that pitch deck just went to the side. And there are too many ways to try to skin a pitch deck that people try to tell you, but what we really should be doing is taking the advice from the actual people that review 1,000 to 2,000 of them a day, because there is a science to the way that you review through 100. Because the average fund of that 10 to 100 sees 2,000. Well, all they're doing is reviewing those pitch decks for markers. Mm-hmm. And what they're doing is they're trying to figure out what proportion of those pitch decks are going to be the 15 to 20% of them that actually garner time on their calendar that you're actually going to talk to. Right. So if you look at it through that lens, that's the process that I take as to what should be in that pitch deck. So there's a lot of different ways that people could design them. I'm designing and coaching founders on, I'm that junior associate inside of that fund. My job is to sit at this desk and review 100 of them. You're an AI company, and your pitch deck is sitting in the middle of another 30 AI pre-seed companies. How do you stand out? Mm-hmm. The other thing that I tell founders a lot is there's a tendency, some of the founders talked about this, Matthew LaRue of Keiretsu said it very well. There's a tendency for these founders to tell their story, Pankaj, in chronological order, as if they want to hear your entire life story. Mm. And it's a some could say a crude comment, but it's a very real comment. When you're looking at that pitch deck, this is not a story that you have time to start on chapter 1. Your job in that pitch deck is to set that hook and become one of those 15, 20 that actually get on the calendar. So the way that we like to do them is a little less business model and a little bit more about showing awareness in the primary factors of the business model. So for example, market size and opportunity. Be that deck inside that doesn't go $100 million market, I captured 1%, hooray, we're all happy. Do that section different. It doesn't matter what your projection number is. What I'm interested in is the methodology that you use to determine it. Mm-hmm. Because as a qualitative test, I might look at that number and go, he's out of his mind. It's not a 10% KPI. but he's on the right path of how he did the long division. Translation, I invest in you, curveball comes your way. Where's your long division to figure that out? And the same thing goes for, well, I don't have product market fit. That's okay. Tell me, in your opinion, when product market fit is achieved. What does it look like? We use this analogy, Pankaj, of your road through capital is a cross-country trip. And every stage that you raise capital is a gas station. So when you get to that next gas station, your job in front of that investor is to tell him everything about that path between the gas stations. What did it look like? What was the temperature? What did you eat? All of those aspects of bottoms up are the things that you want to get into those pitch decks, and that's the way that we do them. Here's my analysis of product market fit. Here's an analysis of my go-to-market strategy. Here's the analysis of my market size and opportunity. Here's my synopsis of my market entry standpoint for client acquisitions. And here's what I think that means financially. You want to put yourself into a pack of 100 to 200 pitch decks. That's one quick way to stand up.
Absolutely. I love that. No, that's super valuable insight right there. I think that not a lot of people share, I mean, it's still, I think a lot of startups, because we deal with a lot of new founders as well. And people who are first time founders, and it's interesting to see, like, people just don't know where to go about it. So they see online, hey, pitch deck. Okay. That makes sense. But I think, if you're looking at pitch deck and saying, that's going to solve my problem, I think you're a little bit behind the curve in terms of trying to appeal to investors. And I think that's where, having people like you involved really, because to be able to talk to, hundreds of investors and funds and get their insight, that's going to the source, right? Yep. That's where people want to be. You want to know, you want to listen to them. They're the ones that are going to tell you what they want to see. And that's what you should be, that's what you should be working towards in not going off intuition or, some feeling of like, I just believe in myself, because I've had too many founders that feel like they have a great idea, but but when I ask them questions about it, it sometimes becomes uncomfortable because they haven't asked themselves the questions that helpful people like you or being in a community really ask them to really sift through some of those ideas. And I've dealt with it myself as kind of building legal tech products. There's a lot of things that I think we don't know what we don't know. And that blindness can sometimes cost us a lot of time, energy, and money.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One of the investors in our interviews that said it best was Richard Sams of Mohara, a venture studio development, brilliant guy, works with a lot of corporate venture partners. And he talked about confirmation bias in small teams. Mm-hmm. And he says, one of the biggest things that we provide value, and I love this saying, is we throw rocks at it. Meaning he takes each and every one and they'll throw as many rocks as they could possibly think of. And if the concept still stands, then it's ready to go. Put that one aside, bring the next aspect. And that takes a certain level of intellectual honesty that it just seeps through in the conversations when you're sitting with an investor. It really, really does. There's a very fine line between overconfidence, fear, and paranoia. Mm-hmm. And there's a blend in there that investors like to find. Yeah. Overly confident scares me. Mark Cuban said it once. I like founders that are in a constant state of paranoia. That might be a little extreme, but the spirit of his comment, I understand, right? If I give you my money, I want you sleeping with one eye open for that money the same way that I would.
Right. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And I feel maybe, gives me a little confirmation bias because, with my own business, always feel a little paranoid, but I guess that's okay. That's okay. That's I guess a healthy thing to have that concern because, I think once you become complacent with the business and with with where you're at, I mean, just it allows other people to kind of come in, allows competitors. It means you're not really thinking critically about how to innovate and iterate on what you're offering. And I think that's the beauty about business to me is there's always better ways to do something. And the person who figures out, it could be something very simple. It could be creating, a sprocket, but the people who create a better sprocket are the ones that will get the market share.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I love most about the startup space is there's a tendency, I think, for founders to think that they have to make the numbers jump off the page and the valuation jump off the page. And I just don't think that's the case. I think investors are looking for people that can create that spark. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, hey, look, don't worry about tending to the fire. I know how to manage a bonfire. I just need people that can create sparks. Yeah. That's all I need.
Right. Wonderful. That's really, really interesting. I mean, there's so much to talk about. I mean, you've had so many great videos on your mindset channel and page, in interviewing all these experts in different areas. Um, talking about entrepreneurs and are there a few characteristics of the hundreds, maybe thousands of entrepreneurs you've talked to? Are there a few characteristics that you feel stand out to you for the ones that really make it or have a potential to make it big versus maybe some of those who don't?
Hands down. I'm a geek for this question right now, and I ask every investor either on camera or off about this. Because here's the funny thing is, people can give you a specific diagram from quantitative information of what's a good fit for them. I'm still looking for the investor or fund who can tell me that same level of detail when it comes to qualitative skill sets. So a lot of them will laugh and they'll say it's kind of the gut. So with the luxury I have of talking with these people, there are 3 to 4 that I feel are mine and are pretty much shared across the board. One is, regardless of whether or not you're a first-time founder or an experienced person, the ability for selling skills within an initial founding team is always top 5, right? And this can be a challenge in certain industries where you have very technical founders, maybe slightly introverted, maybe not comfortable out there talking. So those particular founders have an extra level of responsibility to offset that. The other thing that I've oftentimes seen is a certain level of charisma that doesn't cross into arrogance, right? You have to have the ability to communicate. And I guess that correlates really well with selling skills, but it also bleeds into corporate culture. If you're to be successful at this raise, you guys aren't the only ones anymore. There's another 30 people in there. How do you operate? Are you that person that just barks at people all day? Or are you someone that has that little bit of a bedside manner? So that's a really important one. And I think the third one goes back to what I said before of a little bit of that constant state of paranoia matched with a steady confidence. If I find one default in qualitative analysis of a lot of the founders, it's overconfidence. That scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're overconfident, then you're not going through this founder life with the proper lenses with your head on a swivel. And it's going to be a matter of time before somebody blindsides you.
Yeah.
So those are 3 really important skill sets that I've heard shared across each and every member of the community that I talk with.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Kind of along those lines with slight pivot is, I mean, it comes up a lot, with early stage founders is, what if they don't have a lot of capital to get this project, get the idea off the ground? What do you tell them? Like, you're saying, hey, you're trying to build let's say, a hotel, not a hotel, maybe it's a new way of a new hostel, where people are coming to stay, and you're building a different way of doing that could require some capital. How do you approach that, for someone who wants to build something that may require capital, but they just don't have a lot available?
Great question, because I get this one a lot in our Slack community, and I'm always happy to answer this one, because I think this may keep Pankaj a good amount of ideas and founders out of the system because of this concern. First off, before that one, what I always ask a lot of the investors is, does previous experience or Stanford graduate have anything to do with your decision-making process? Haven't met one that said yes. So that's a key thing for founders to know. And it's one that I hear a lot of. I didn't go to a fancy school. I don't come from money. I don't know investors. What am I going to be doing playing in those circles? Well, put that one aside. Secondly is, there's a tendency at times for founders who don't have a lot of capital to put in with an idea, and reasonably it could cost $500,000 just to build out that MVP and build the structure. And what I often tell them is, if they've at least made a good valiant attempt to introduce to investors and it just didn't work, or you got really dismayed with the process, it's because they see a lot of these scenarios. Where I've seen it done the most successfully is, there are founders that understand there's 2 ways in the very beginning. There's the ideal way that I can create checks that will build this out. And if I'm not fortunate enough to have that one, then I'm going to hustle this thing. And what that means is, I'm going to implement every single part of that business plan other than spending that money. And I've seen this done brilliantly. Zach Slayback at 1517 said it best in an interview. when he said, I'll take all the products and features and everything away, and basically said, here's a wire, explain to me your business model. And the spirit of that is very interesting. If I pare everything away, or I tell founders, explain to me your business model, but you're not allowed to talk about your products and features, then all of a sudden they're like, well, how do I talk about it? So when I get that point where they're kind of like, huh, that's the part we go, okay, that part that made your brain hurt right there, that's the part that you control, and that doesn't take money. What does this mean in terms of translation or execution? I've seen great MVPs and heard stories of them from investors where they needed $500,000. You know what they did? They learned how to build websites. They learned logos and designs. You and I have a passion for design. We didn't learn it overnight, right?
Right.
They created that website. They built the pitch. They got online. They figured out how to create mocks. I've seen MVPs, Pankaj, that are PowerPoint slide presentations with voiceover narrative saying, it's not built yet, but let me walk you through the demo.
Right.
It's stuff like that. That's what gets across. Yeah. Now, let me be very frank with you. When I tell that to a lot of founders, there's a good percentage of them that don't really feel like doing that.
Right. Right.
And that's okay. Yeah. But there is a way. Now, imagine you come through an investor and you've done all this homework and you focus group and you test and you've got on the phones and you say, okay, well, I don't have anything to sell them, but I'm calling those customers anyway. And you prove through that charisma and selling skills that I said with this little demo, how are you going to look at that person as an investor?
Oh, yeah. It's a hustler.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's a small proportion that play the game that way, but I hope that people hear this and others that tell the stories, because you want to get an investor's attention, do as much as you can without money and present it. And typically, you're going to get a meeting.
I totally agree with that. And you know, I think you and I are similar. There's sometimes there is a negative connotation that goes with someone who's a jack of all trades, or, you know, maybe a dilettante of some sort. But I think there's a real advantage as an entrepreneur to being able to wear many hats and do things when things are necessary. And I think those entrepreneurs that I've seen that don't shy away from that, who are willing to, like you said, like have those uncomfortable conversations too, right? Open yourself up to rejection. Those are, I've seen critical skills to being successful as an entrepreneur, because, you know, I think you made a really great comment about, you know, feeling like you don't have the resume, feeling like, oh, you know, you didn't go to a great school, you don't have an X or Y degree, whatever it might be. But honestly, I think those things hold people back a lot more than they actually help people. Because now it's almost like golden handcuffs in some ways at a nice job, is that now you feel like you have more to lose because you have built up this persona that you've got to protect to the rest of the world. But if you let go of that, and say, hey, you know, those are just the past, those happen to be parts of me, but those are not me, then you free yourself up to do amazing things and try things and fail. Because every entrepreneur, if they're a successful entrepreneur, has failed, right? Everyone. Me too. You know, you know, my first two law firms iterations, you know, didn't do well, but the third time around, you know, I was able to figure out a way to build it. But it was a lot of, you know, and persistence too, right? I think that's a big part of it, is the persistence to see things through when other people may give up, in life and sports, and I think in business too. And I think that's a tough one. And maybe, you know, maybe we can chat a little bit about that, because I'm actually interested in kind of hearing your thoughts on, you know, when to persist versus when to pivot.
Boy, the day-old question. The day-old question.
And I don't expect you to have the answer, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question in my interviews when I say, hey, you know, the product market fit's about to be achieved. How do you know when there may need to be a pivot? And I've heard some good answers before, but whenever you're starting out in these processes, to me, it's very important to always lay out the roadmap ahead and to have a set of expectations. Mm-hmm. But don't just put expectations numerically. Explain the rhyme and the reason of how you're going to get there. That's the bottoms up. You know, so like when I did Mindset, this is sort of lean startup model. It's self-funded. You'd be amazed at how little we spend to be able to gain this traction. But that's only because September's activities. We film in late August. So next week in September, September's game plan was built in great detail in March.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
when we play that way and I get to that next stage and I see the numbers, then my question for pivoting is, was I totally off base in the minutia that led to that number? Were there unforeseen events that I couldn't control that means I shouldn't pivot yet? I should go ahead and rinse and repeat this? Or was there just something in that particular approach? We did everything we could. We did everything we can, leave it on the table with clear conscience and say, that lane didn't work. So it is a difficult one, and I think it's really a personal one. And having pivoted so many times in my life, kind of like you said, as you've learned, that's kind of how I've learned. And that's the way that I build it now. So if I pivot, the worst thing about pivot is regret. It plays in the back of your brain. And for me, who's constantly thinking, it's actually a nuisance. So that model that I described is perfect for me, so that when I pivot, I can shut that part of my brain off and go, don't go back there. Don't look in that rearview mirror. We beat the heck out of that thing. We tried everything. This is the new path. So and I think that hesitancy and regret builds too much sometimes.
So you're saying it's mindset.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pankaj was wrong. That was smooth.
Oh man. Yeah, no, I mean, I think the mindset is really part of it, because I mean, it's a loaded question on honestly and obviously, because there's no right answer to that question, when to pivot versus when to persist. You're right. I think it's deeply personal as well. But I think it's and I think it's looking at your what your life circumstances too, right? If you have a family to support, if you have other things, you have obligations, then that factors in, and that's okay, right? And I think sometimes, I love the work. I think every entrepreneur, I'm a big proponent of meditation and mindfulness, and every entrepreneur needs to have some element of well-being in their life, because there's so many ups and downs in that process. And that, I think when the downs happen, you don't take it so personally. And I think that's critical to really having clarity about pivoting versus persisting, because, there's entrepreneurs out there that have risked everything, right? Mortgaged their house, done these things to really, because they believe in themselves. And some have been successful and some have not, and if you're willing to take those risks, more power to you. But I think, yeah, understanding what your circumstances are is really important. And yeah.
You got to gut check as founders. I did this earlier this week with a couple of companies we're working with on the advisory side. And we kind of stopped the process and said, this is really a you guys question. And it wasn't about business. It was about their personal ambition, their goals. Struggled for a long time, threw every penny into this thing. When you do that, oftentimes it's not so great back at home when you go home. There's a lot of issues that have been risked for this move. And sometimes it's time for those founders to have a gut check, right? To make sure to say, hey, should we stay on the gas pedal this high? Like, I'm burning out right now. I don't even want to go home. I'm arguing. I'm putting all the money here. I'm not putting it here. So founders, in addition to get ahead of those pivots, need to have more of those gut check huddles. Like, hey, man, how you doing? Are you feeling good? Everything good at home? You're okay with where this is going? Because sometimes you just put the foot on the gas and just say, go, 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 go. And we don't have that ability to just check in at a personal level, because if you got 4 founders and 2 of them are checked out mentally, then you really have 2 founders running the company.
Yeah, so true. And the communication, right? I think I love that book. I think it's crucial communications, or crucial accountability, where teaching founders to have those conversations with their founders, and also with their loved ones at home, their partners, right? Making sure everyone's on the same page is a huge element of this, because I'm a strong believer too. At the end of the day, I mean, the entrepreneurship journey is so much fun, so rewarding in so many ways. But if it leads you to have an unhappy, personal life or health, you have health problems because of it, then what's it worth, right? And I think having having that gut check, taking a step back, setting time, just like you said, planning in March what you're going to be doing in September. I think taking time to think about, and every your calendar, and time for you, and time for your own mental well-being is so incredibly important, and not really talked about as much I think, as it needs to be.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything going on topically now when it comes to, mental health and the other things. Granted, there are the extreme cases, but there are things that sort of build up, especially nowadays. You throw in COVID and maybe someone in the house isn't working and you're trying to raise a startup. It's like, now's the time that you really need to double down on sort of those gut checks and realities with one another, and possibly even for the next year or two until we get into a little bit more familiar or normal ass environments.
Yeah. You mentioned, talking about COVID and kind of the world we're living in right now. I feel we'd be remiss not to talk, about kind of the unique nature of the world and how that might shape the next few years for startups and investors. What are the conversations you're having with investors about the world we're living in? Are they now just are they saying we're not going to even touch certain industries, or what have you kind of discussed there?
Yeah, again, a lot of stuff that I talk in pre-interviews or off camera, because I'm just out of my own curiosity. So for any of the founders listening, I've yet to meet a fund that stopped raising capital, or investing, but timetables have dramatically changed, right? There have been a number of funds that have literally made a very strong tilt and pivot to their investment criteria and are now focusing on projects, concepts, ideas, and technologies directly related to COVID and or meeting the needs of COVID-related health situations. So that's been a little interesting. When I talk with them about where this is going to change business, I'd say, Pankaj, a good 3, 4 out of 10 all agree that the way that we do business from a work environment and a work culture has now permanently changed. And I have to say, after talking to them so much, I subscribe to this. And by that, I mean, it doesn't mean there aren't going to be the brick and mortar offices, but this has been the day-old question for many years since this type structure we're using now was introduced. And there was a very strong reluctancy to go, I don't really want to pull that piece out of the Jenga set, because if I'm the one that makes the Jenga set fall down, and then here comes COVID and forced you to pull a couple things out of the Jenga set, now they're looking at it and going, holy, it's still standing. Yeah. Well, can we pull another one out? We did, it's still standing. And that reality and forced nature of that reality, I would agree. I think we're going to see a lot of businesses that are going to be like, you know what? We kept our numbers. In fact, we increased, and no one was in that entire side of the building.
Yeah. I think it's so fascinating. I mean, I just personally, even we've had to pull some of those pieces out as a law firm and pivot very quickly because, we were in downtown LA at the US Bank Tower, which is in the background here. And we had to say, we can't be here anymore. There doesn't make any sense for us to be in a building, where we can't use it. And I don't want to risk any of my employees. There was no reason for me to risk the health of any of my employees when most of, almost all everything we do can be done remotely and online. And it's been fascinating to see the change, now. I mean, I think the well-being of my employees has increased, actually. I mean, I think there's obviously some correction for COVID and the general, stress that we're all feeling. But overall, I felt like, some of my employees were traveling at least 2 hours a day commuting, 2.5 hours, a day commuting. Now they have that time back, time with family. And, I mean, I just think that it's so fascinating to how that's changed LA and the world in general. And
it's really interesting. And then, then my brain goes all the way down the supply chain. It's like, well, what's going to happen in commercial real estate? And,
right.
How are they going to keep these rent pieces? And, I think I have to stop myself from going down that rabbit hole. The great thing about this whole process is, there's going to be change. There's going to be some learning curves. We're going to have some peaks and troughs associated with that monetarily. But I think we have to look at the bright side of it. There are certain industries, a lot of industries, in my personal opinion, that got a little fat on the hog. And this a little bit of shake up here and shaking the tree, what it's really doing, and you're already seeing it, is it's bringing back that creative entrepreneurial spirit. When your back's against the wall, you may not have ever worried about coming up with a solution. But just look at the creative ways small and large corporations are getting back into that almost startup-like mindset, right? Where it's like, hey, before you told me I was going to save $10,000, I said it's not worth it. Now you save me $5,000. Go, give me another $5,000. Where can we trim? Where can we trim?
Right.
And I think that's good for business at certain times. Not to sound in a bleak time, but those particular mindsets are very valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're right. And I think it's easy to become a lot of industries have become complacent, I mean, not to downplay the challenges that I think, a lot of small mom and pop businesses, restaurants, hotels are feeling. But I do believe in the ingenuity and innovation of, the American spirit and the human spirit, not American spirit, everyone around the world. We're very good at adapting, humans. And I think that's one of the things that I am really, I'm actually interested to see like how I think there's gonna be a lot of great ideas, a lot of really interesting businesses, a lot of really creative solutions that come out of this world that we're living in. And I think we're already seeing some,
Yeah, there's been some phenomenal ideas that I've seen. A lot of them are relating to tracking one another in terms of hygiene, in terms of sterilizing things. And I've talked to some of these founders, and they're like, you know what? I don't want to sound non-empathetic to this, but no one listened to me for the last 4 years. Now my dance card's full.
Yeah.
And a lot of this in the med tech space. We did an interview with Eller of Jumpstart Foundry, and I asked her, "What are you most excited about?" And essentially, in so many words, Pankaj, she talked about it's shake-up and efficiencies of healthcare. Again, these were things that were like, "Hey, don't pull that piece out of the Jenga set. No, don't rock the boat."
Yeah.
And now they're forced to change, and legacy softwares and administration and waiting times and all of these things. If we can come out of this on the other side, are going to have far more efficiencies built in, which.
Absolutely.
Trying to find silver linings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of things that, I mean, there's challenges I think still will have to be addressed that I'm one of those things that I recently read a book called Together by Vivek Murthy, who was the Surgeon General under Obama. And it's about the one of the largest epidemics facing the US is the feeling of isolation and feeling alone, and how do we deal with that? How do we deal with how this coronavirus COVID world may contribute to that? But I think that's an opportunity for startups and founders and entrepreneurs to really address that issue, right? And I think make some change there. So
Sure.
I think it'll be fascinating. The last few minutes, I want to kind of ask you a little bit more about yourself. I'm always intrigued, like what lights you up? What excites you?
I'm a workaholic. So, and I say that because it's self-inflicted. Creating a new brand is something that I committed the next couple of years to. But what makes me the most excited is being able to just relax and chill with my friends on the weekends. It's little things. What makes me excited is cooking on Sundays, starting early, and having the house smell like my mom used to do. Right?
What do you cook? What do you cook? I love cooking too. So what do you cook?
Yeah. Well, I have a bunch of recipes. So all my family originally is from Lake Charles. I was never there. We just got annihilated with this storm. And so a lot of Cajun recipes that luckily I got my mom to be able to write down, and I like testing those. But I also like a lot of Mexican food, and I have my own, what we call in the house of Verlin's fusion. So I have this ability to go that part of the dish and that part of the dish and bring them together. I'm also a grill guy, and when I'm not working, it's relaxing. I live by the beach, so I like to go out by the beach. I like to go run. Things that I say require me to use my brain Pankaj as least as possible.
Yes.
Because the hard drive runs. And then on early Saturdays, I'm one of the weirdos. My Man City Cup. I'm that guy that wakes up and season starts in a couple weeks. I'm that guy that wakes up at 4:00 on a Saturday and the neighbors hear me yelling in my house.
Wow. How do you get into soccer? Where does that come from?
There's a friend of ours who owned a very popular bar in town where we used to live that was from Manchester. And we used to go in there all the time and basically just kind of soaking it up in him and watching the excitement. If you've never watched European football, it is so different than our current American sports. But what really sucked me in was before I got really deep into preparing for Mindset, we did a lot of international traveling. My wife and I went to lots of parts of Europe. And there is a connection like no other when you're in one of those stadiums compared to our stadiums, I believe.
Yes.
because the environment, the chants, and you're learning the songs, and so after friends exposing it to us, and then going there and really getting immersed in it, we came back, and I haven't watched an American sport in a while. I just watch European football.
Really? Wow. Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah. No, that's very cool. I think you're right. I mean, the level of play of European football, or, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And we might actually get Messi. So let's get the fingers crossed.
That'd be huge. That'd be crazy.
Yeah.
Is there a favorite quote or saying that you keep up somewhere, or that you'll often go to?
It's an old mentor of mine, and I said this the other day. I say this to a lot of founders that I still live by today, because I'm a very left brain, right brain person. And he would see myself over analyzing things a lot, which I can have a tendency to do. Luckily, with a few gray hairs in the beard, you learn how to harness that. But he told me a couple of great things. But the one that always stood with me, and I don't know if he pulled this from anywhere or if this was his own. He says, you got to realize there's two types of people in this world. There's people that look at a watch and wonder what time it is, and there's people that look at that watch and wonder how it's made. When you're in this business of finance, your job in the very beginning is to figure out which one they are, and that will make your job much easier. And I stuck with it. It has so many implications in business, particularly when you're combining qualitative and quantitative data like we do in this crazy game of startups. You have to be able to understand that audience. You have to know their mindset. But if you have the ability to understand that mindset, not through questions, but just watching other things. So you might have an investor that's interested, and he simply wants to know what time it is, and you took off on a 10-minute rant about how the watch was made. And there's a dance to this process. And so I use that saying in so many aspects, and even to gut check myself. Like, how do I want to respond to this? How do I want to play this? And I kind of look at it and go, okay, well, was he asking for what time it was, or was he asking how the watch was? Seriously. It has a lot of implications. So that's my favorite quote.
I love that. I've never heard that, but that has me thinking, yeah, about all the conversations I've had.
It's all about preventing as much as possible about talking past people. And we do that a lot, especially when we're typing it in, or you get some kind of text message and you're like, well, what the hell does that mean? Yeah. And so it constantly reminds me not to talk past, try to understand that person's intention and meet it, but don't think that everyone needs a dissertation on what's going through your brain.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, listening, I mean, that's something I'm working on a lot. And I think being in a relationship, if you realize that more and more, yes, your partner is sometimes one of the best teachers for you, but no, this has been great. I wanted to actually just leave it with you, maybe talking a little bit more about how people get in touch with you, and also mindset, and where they can learn more and potentially connect.
Yes, please. Thank you. You can find me. I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. So you can just go into LinkedIn, search Verlin Gradney. Luckily, with a name like that, you're going to find me. Although there are a couple new Verlins in there. If you'd like to learn about mindset, just visit mindsetacademyondemand.com. That's Mindset Academy on Demand. You'll see all the information that we have on investors, and you'll have a free registration link on there. You can join our Slack community, and that's how you get access to all of our interviews and content for free. You see our advisory site. So hit me up on LinkedIn, or just visit mindsetacademyondemand.com.
Fantastic. Well, Verlin, I really want to thank you again for taking the time and talking and sharing your insight and expertise. It's been fantastic. I learned a lot, got some great quotes, and I look forward to continuing to talk, and maybe we'll do a part 2.
Awesome, man. Thank you for having me. Thanks for everyone for listening. I greatly appreciate it. And we barely scratched the surface. I can't believe it's an hour. So if we want to do the trilogy, let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, buddy. You too.
All right. Bye.